shot ginga. Fulling of Moorard the Shy agus Tardine Brashlin. That was a little essay, one of many essays that waited on the Glanviaur from Master Dillon back in the day, and it is a tribute to the education that we got in Coolard, that I can remember it perfectly 50 years later. And as I say, it's more than Kusahishtumsa on Laur Shah Hiola, because as Maurice said, 4 generations of the Murphys went to Coolard. The first, Roger, 1874, my father 1916, myself 1958, and my daughter 1996. And I'd like to mention was made previously of Mrs. Baker, who was known as Miss Hayes in my time, and I'm delighted to see her here this evening. She was my first teacher when I went to Coolard National School, and I fondly remember the singing lessons that we had in particular, because there was much pressure then. If you were a singer, you stood up on the stool. If you were a precon, which I was, you stood on the floor. And I remember she endeavouring to teach us Kelly, the boy from Killan. She had a lovely car at the time. Cars were a semi-novelty in the late 50s. A baby Austin A40, I think DIU 750. And Master Dillon, who'd come over the hill to the shouts of, he's coming, he's coming, he's coming. He drove a bright green Ford Popular ZX 4858. And they parked both cars in front of the grotto facing one another. And as well we could trace the day's disasters in the morning, the master's face in the morning a lot of the time. Because when he came into the school, he took off the hat and coat and he hung them beside his dresser or his press. And when he turned around, if there was a rib of hair dislodged from its proper place on the top of his head, you were out for it that day. The first I had with Coolard School was not so much about the school, but about Vincent Dillon. He was there, I suppose, over 20 years when I went there. But I had a grandaunt living in our house called Kate Murphy. She was a devout religious woman, and I wouldn't say that I share her devotion, but I have her dress sense in common with her because she always wore black. Anyway, when myself and Bride were cross, she'll say to Bride was older than me, of course, and much more wicked. She's down there now, you wouldn't know by the head of her decision. And poor old Auntie Kate used to say anyway, wait till you go over to May Lane. And she used to say to me, wait till you go over to Vincent Dillon. And God knows, I didn't know what she was talking about at the time, but I found out afterwards. And I have many memories which I mentioned, I think I wrote about in one of the Ballydonoghue parish magazines about my time in Coolard. And the thing, what we learned there, Maurice mentioned it already, the essays, the Egaharish, Nahashti, the mental arithmetic, of course, and mental it was, because there was a fellow at that time who used to go to town with a load of money, spend half it in one shop, a quarter of it in another shop, and 1 and 8 pence. And I declare to God, if we caught him, we'd smack him because he broke our bloody hearts. Trying to figure out how much he went to town in the first place. So that was something that has stuck in my mind about Coolard School. But there was great highlights, as I have mentioned before. The bringing of the turf, they brought horse rails and ass rails of turf to the school, and one of the classes would be sent out to bring in the turf. That was great, because you would bring in a sod at the time, you see. Health and safety was big in those days. But if the master wasn't looking, you'd take the sod back out, just to make sure that the proceedings wouldn't end until 3 o'clock and we'd be all going home. The same story was, of course, was weeding the grotto. We'd be sent out in the fine weather to weed the grotto, maybe 2 or 3 of us. And you'd collect up a fish the weeds, carry them across the road and throw them into the glush, if we don't mind. But if you wouldn't watch and were looking out the window out in the yard, you'd bring back over with you again and prolong the whole situation. So that was my memories of Coolard. Mechanisation was big in those days, of course, and I was fascinated by tractors, and I mentioned before, and you see it tonight, Gerald Fitzgerald with his lovely blue Fordson Dexter. Then there was Tyson Dolan with his Fordson Major, and he had a side-mounted mowing barrel, and he used to be cutting the hay outside the school wall there, just where the the extension is now. And then of course there was Ted McElligott, who had an old David Brown, and what else? Oh yeah, there was Dennis Dowling, I think, across where the sports field is now. He had a little grey TV on. We used to watch him there saving the hay, and wish someday that we could be like him and afford a tractor like him. And if we did our sums at school and wrote our essays, we might just be a successful farmer or a successful something someday, escape anyway, one way or another. And of course the visitors were another thing that made the school life very enjoyable, and we had a number of them, namely clergy. Father Mikey Lane mentioned already, Father Sean Dillon, the Black Dowling. The Black Dowling's visit was always very interesting because he went out to the hall, the master went out to the hall to receive him, and he stayed out there, and 2 mugs were sent out a couple of minutes after his arrival, and we didn't see the master until about 3 o'clock. When he returned from the hall anyway, he had all the appearances of a man who had spent too long in the sun. I don't think it was the sun myself. So they were the highlights of Coolard for me. And I suppose then this brought us up to 1966, and another tribute, I suppose, to the great education that we received in Coolard was when we went into St. Michael's, because 2 of us went from Coolard School into St. Michael's, Bernard McMahon and myself, and 2 other Mountain Bogues like ourselves came in from Lizelta National School. They had escaped the clutches of Master Liam de Bruyne. One of them was Maurice Mahony, and the other one was Ger Mulvihill. Exactly. So I had only spent 2 or 3 days at school when I went home to my mother and said, God knows, I think I'm after making an awful bad mistake. These fellas inside there are way ahead of us. They're very clever. They seem to have opinions about everything. And Father Long was the principal at that time. And I'm referring particularly, of course, to townies now, because thankfully there's no townies here. And they had, oh, Father, I think this, and Father, I think that. They had opinions about everything. So the mother says to me, anyway, stick it out for a bit and you'll see how you get on. So that was great. The first hurdle to pass was the Christmas exams after we joined. And that time, when the Christmas exams were over, the list was put up on the wall for everyone to see who came first in the class, second in the class, etc., etc. And guess what? The country boys were like the barbarians who came from the north and laid waste ancient Rome. We were at the top of the class, and all the townies with all their chatting and talking and opinions were down at the end, and we made sure that that's where they stayed for 5 years. Now, we have learned, we picked up several gems of wisdom while we were in St. Michael's, myself and Maurice, and we often refresh those memories. Like, for example, we learned from Rocky that a set is a well-defined collection of distinct objects. We also found out that omnia gallia divida est in tres partes. We found out that Dracontus, what did he do? He supervised the first Olympic Games. He was a Spartan. And we discovered that Pompey defeated the pilots at Coracesium in Asia Minor. Do you remember that? Yes, you do. Oh, we don't forget it. So that was our education. Finished up in 71, and there was about 5 or 6 of us in St. Michael's. We got the call to training at the time, myself and Maurice included, and we said we won't bother with that when we go away to university or something. So that was the plan anyway. So I thought, and then you got the envelope from the training college or the Department of Education or whatever in early August or something, maybe July, August, to tell you got the call to training. So I got my envelope anyway, refused the call and decided I'd go to UCD. Went into town to post it, met one of the fellows in the class and said, well, what's the crack anyway? He said, oh Jesus, we're all going to St. Pat's. So all the lads went off to St. Pat's, and I took a different road, and I suppose if I hadn't, I wouldn't be worshipping here for the last 26 years. So that's more or less life. And I'd like to congratulate Maurice on his 43 years in Coolard School. He has had the school to himself for 25% of its existence, and I can well imagine he only took over when he was 20 years of age, and when I was 20 years of age I was quite cracked. I could see myself becoming a school principal and sort of settling into that kind of life. So there's a great tribute due to him, that he had the courage, the tenacity, the strength and the determination to work as a principal from such an early age, to be dropped into the deep end, as it were, and make such a fantastic job of it. And I suppose the great tribute that you can pay to the school, I suppose, and its great achievement is obviously its academic results and reputation, but also the fact that Gulshe excessive on force that is still there, because as you've heard already, there was major move to have a central school in Listowel back in the day, but the people and the school Maurice an Frivide, agus an Fern, agus an Borbanastíta, agus na Dina, Winter and Counter, they stood against it, they held out, and they got their way, and they got a school. And it's a wonderful thing, because a school is like a water well in a community. It keeps the community together, it keeps the community alive, and there's a great tribute due to the community around Coolard for what they have done for Maurice and for the school over all these years. And I won't say anything about the book, because I want you to buy it if you want to find out what's in it. You've got a taste of it already. It's great. It's a fantastic read. It's a beautiful publication, very well put together. There's a little bit of everything in it, and as they say, it is great to see your people of your own family listed in it, who attended there, and of course putting in the 1966 the final primary subject into it was an inspired idea as well. And looking at it there, I think that one of the essays was what was one of the essays again? Madra ruegin to scale. That was one of them. Another one was what was the other one? Pata ata agum sawala agusam are ahogan me di no do. The English essays then, can I remember one of them? Trees and their uses. An old bus tells its story. And the very first essay in the primary in English was fairies. So, as Peg Sayre says, Bin Rohamur and Thili Gone, Casa Agus Cullen on Sailmore Kraken, and that's exactly what it does. But survival is the name of the game, and that's what a Coolard school has done. So, all I would say to conclude is Listowel and North Kerry is the literary equivalent of Cape Canaveral. We're great at launching things here, or so I think. So in launching this book, I would wish that go make Skull Coolard ar an Vód go fada an lá, agus go make Éileamh ar an Leabhar seo go fada an lá freisin, agus a bheris go marthaigh tú an céad. Go raibh míle maith agaibh.